Hello, gentles and ladymen. I'm Ulan the Bison, and I am proud to announce that Season 3 of the tier lists is here. Season 3 of Age of Empires 3 unit tier lists is back, and it's better than ever, and this video is going to be something I haven't done before, and it's kind of going over a synopsis of the tier lists, how exactly they'll function, how I'm grading everything, how things get their rank, and so on and so forth, as well as announcing all of the tier list categories that we will be covering in our tier lists. This season we'll go over 9 separate tier lists. Those tier lists include heavy and light infantry. They include heavy and light cavalry. They include artillery. They include my personal favorite tier list, which is the heroes. We will also be going over mercenaries and outlaws. And we also have one mystery tier list that will be released on April 1st. So make of that what you will, and try to put your guesses in. We will not be covering natives this year. I made a native tier list in Season 2, and natives have barely changed. 2 of the native civilizations that had only 2 techs have a 3rd tech that are decent, but they don't change the overall ranking, as well as a couple minor tech changes that kind of reduce the OP-ness that some of the European civs have, but they're still OP, so it doesn't change anything. If you want my view on natives, feel free to go back and view the past video. I will, in fact, be putting the last year's native tier list in this season's playlist, just to make it easy for viewers to go from one to the other and make sure that you get all of the content. Now let's go over my criteria for how I decide which units are going into which tier list, because I always get tons of comments in my videos asking why I don't include some units into the tier lists. If a civilization has access to that unit, and it is a common trainable access to it that they can train for standard military purposes, that is included into the tier list. And this includes things like the USA, for example, with USA skirmishers, they have a lot of entries in there because they have the state militia that they can train, and they also have the sharpshooter that they can train. But they also have the Owlhoot, which is a guaranteed trainable USA-only unit that they have, then get access to no matter the map, even though it's an outlaw. So the Owlhoot would appear on the skirmisher tier list and not the outlaw tier list, as the outlaw tier list is full of map-dependent ones. It does not, however, include one-time shipments that they get. So if they had the Jaeger shipment, that is a mercenary shipment, but it is not a trainable access unit. So instead, the Jaegers would be not on this list, and you would find Jaegers as just as one of the standard mercenaries on the mercenary tier list. Now, some units will appear in 2 different tier lists, and that's because there's 2 different contexts for them. For example, Jaeger is going to appear on the mercenary tier list, but it's also going to appear on said skirmisher tier list, but specifically it's going to appear as the Swedish Jaeger, because the Sweden gets trainable access to Jaegers, and in fact it takes the role of their skirmisher because they have no other skirmisher. Same goes for Black Riders for Sweden. It also does not include export units. Export units for the Asian civilizations are a thing, and they are trainable, but there are a couple reasons I'm not including them on this tier list. The first is that they have so much access to so many different units through the consulate that it would just bog down the tier list and make it kind of way too long, longer than they are already. My tier list videos are already extremely lengthy, so it's just not something I want to do. And also, because export, while important, yes, to the Asian civilizations, and it is absolutely a resource you need to use, it's kind of like XP 2.0. You know, you're never going to have full export armies unless you've realized that you've gone the whole game without spending export, and then just spend it all at once on a huge-ass fucking army. In that regard, it's kind of similar to shipments. You know, export in the Consulate units are going to be small bonuses that you get throughout your game, rather than just like shipments, rather than the meat and potatoes of your gameplay. So as a result, the Consulate units are not going to be included, even unique ones such as the Yamabushi and the Hatamoto Samurai. So that goes over what goes into the 5 standard civilization tier lists, which are the heavy and light infantry, the heavy and light cavalry, and the artillery. The mercenary tier list and the outlaw tier list are specifically the mercenaries that you get in your tavern, as well as whatever mercenary shipments that you get. That are available to the different civilizations. We're not going to include civilization-specific mercenaries, but just kind of talk about them broadly. So when we mention Jaegers, we're going to mention the Jaeger shipment that some civilizations have access to, but not those civilizations specifically. We're just going to talk about the quality of the Jaeger shipments. The same goes for Outlaws. The hero tier list will, of course, just be all of the civilization's heroes. We are not going to be this is a civilization-specific tier list, so native heroes, such as the Akan hero, are not going to be included in this, nor are revolutionary heroes like Bolivar. This is specifically talking about explorers each civilization can get. A lot of civilizations can get more than one explorer. We are not going to be... We are going... And we will be mentioning those, but the... there are 22 civilizations in the game, I think, and so there will be 22 entries in the tier list. It is talking specifically about all things hero according to each civilization. As for what goes into determining the overall ranking of units, because this is something that a lot of people ask me questions about and disagree with my assumptions because they don't realize why I'm rating something the way I am, because maybe I didn't explain it clearly enough. This is not talking about endgame stats, although endgame stats do take a part in it. This is an overall viability tier list for every single unit according to as many metrics as we can think of. We take their overall stats into account, we take their scalability into account, whether they're good in the early game but bad in the late game, or good in the late game but bad in the early game. We take their prices into account. Some units are a lot pricier than others, and some of them are a lot cheaper for very similar stats. We take their availability into account. How easy is it to get to a point where you can train them? If it is an outlaw unit, that's pretty restrictive. However, if it's a normal unit, then that's not so restrictive, and you can more easily mix it with other units. Another thing is age up requirements. That has a lot to do with availability as well. If a unit is locked behind an age 4 or an age 3, that's going to hurt their ranking. Another big thing that a lot of people disagree with, but I think is extremely important, is the unit's place in the overall roster of the civilization. If a unit has nothing that can complement it in the civilization, that's going to hurt it as well. And a really great example of this, I think, is why one might rate the Portugal Musketeers lower than the British Musketeers, despite the fact that they have the same amount of upgrades and very similar scaling and stats towards the endgame. And the reason that you would rank one lower than the other is, one, because of availability, where all of the upgrades, the British Musketeer upgrade cards are available in the 2nd and 3rd age, whereas you have to get to the 4th to get the last upgrade for Portugal, as well as the unit core military group, because the most ideal thing you want to pair with heavy infantry is heavy cavalry or a good cannon, and the British have both of these in spades, with Royal Guard and triple-carded Hussar, as well as the Rocket, and Portugal does not. They have pretty standard Hussar, with maybe a card or two that goes into them, and they have no special heavy cannon equivalents. And so and as such, Portugal's late-game focus is generally not favored for Musketeers, even if they're really good in the early game, and so that might affect that pairing right there. When I do these tier lists, I always bring a second person along to help correct me for inconsistencies I make, as well as bring a second opinion in, which sometimes changes my mind about some things and other times doesn't. Overall, at the end of the day, it is my tier list and my decision on where to put things, but I always make sure to have a second perspective in case I accidentally overlook something that somebody calls me a fool for, and that person is right there to do it in my face for you guys. With that, that is everything I can think of to get out of the way when we are going into this. I hope you guys enjoy Season 3 of the tier lists. The polls are either already out or about to come out for which one we will be doing first, and see you then in the first video.
Still my heart beats again and again. I'm always searching for love with no sense of